back in 2017, the publication committee of the Nouwen Legacy Trust, who are responsible for Henri's literary legacy, got in touch with me because they knew I was a writer who knew Henri well. And they said, we've got this trapeze material and we don't know what to do with it. It's not quite a book. It doesn't add up to a book. It's been sitting here for 25 years. Have a read and see what you can think of. So I started in 2017. I went to the archives, my husband Jeff and I, and dug around and read what we could find and got kind of fascinated. So that's how the project was launched, with a request from the Henri's estate. As a writer myself, when I started working on it, I realized there were two key mysteries that I didn't have the answer to, and I don't think Henri had the answer to. And one was, why did it hit him that dramatically at that moment in his life? He was 59 years old. He'd gone to the circus with his elderly father and some friends, and he saw this trapeze troupe and was mesmerized. So why then? What in his life fit that and brought him to that point? So that was one mystery that I was real curious about. And then the other one was just, why didn't he write the book? I mean, there were 5 years there, and he wrote, I don't know, 6 other books, 7. He had a lot of projects on the go, but this one was so important to him. He thought it would be maybe his most important book ever. And I wondered, were his expectations just too high? What were all the reasons? So part of what my book does is it tries to create a framework where Henri himself can try to figure those things out. So I can bring in writings, not just his trapeze writings, but other writings from the time and other things that seem connected to what brought him to that point in his life. So I should probably say my book is framed by this weird true story that Henri arrived in Holland in 1986 in September, 26 years ago, and went to a hotel and wasn't feeling well, called down to the front desk. They called emergency services. They came, decided he was having a heart attack. The stairs were too steep. The elevator was too small. They took him out through a window. Mm. True story. Henri's life is often just more dramatic and interesting than fiction.
It's like a parable. And yeah.
It was Henri's flight. It was Henri's last flight. He doesn't die then. He dies, later, but a few days later. But he, I just got kind of fascinated by just the symbolism of this team arrives to get him flying out a window. An athletic team, a team who's disciplined, a team very, in a way, like the trapeze troupe. So the story is framed by this true story of paramedics taking him out a window. And during that time, my fictional piece is during that time, Henri thinks back over his life and tries to figure out for himself, why did the Rodleighs strike him so powerfully? Why didn't he write the book? Well, that was part of what was so interesting in what was in the archives, that what I hadn't kind of really grasped was how much Henri wanted to write a different kind of book. And I knew that. We talked about it when he was alive. We were writers. We talked about his desire to write creative nonfiction, his urge to write even a novel. But I hadn't really thought hard about what that meant to him, that he wasn't going to carry on with the project until he found the form he wanted to write it in. And how hard he worked on that he bought books about creative non-writing, and they were still on the shelves of his bookcase in L'Arche Daybreak. And, I could see where he underlined, and I could really try to get on the inside of what he was trying to do. And as a writer, that was really fascinating to me. And it brought me quite close feeling to Henri again. And the book, it's probably important to say that the book comes about because Henri had a physical experience. It wasn't a bunch of ideas about the trapeze. He went and he saw a performance, and it absolutely riveted him. He trembled, he wept, he had a physical response that he could hardly understand, but he knew it took him back to a different time in his life when he was an adolescent. It awoke a kind of desire and longing to be free, to fly, to be held, to be caught. It wasn't in words, it was a body experience. And so I think his urge to write a story was because he didn't want to impart his ideas or thoughts to an audience. He wanted an audience to have his experience as much as he could. It's a very physical book, and it's told as a story. And Henri really holds back from drawing too many conclusions. He wants the reader to discover, have the joy of discovering their own insights. So part of the book is different because Henri is really doing something different. His other books, I think, start with an insight that he wants to share, that we're all beloved, or that we can find ourselves in the prodigal son story, or very concrete things, often, almost always, I think, within the Christian tradition in some ways. And this is a physical experience that's outside of kind of the usual traditional Christian imagery that he's so comfortable in. And he doesn't really try to impart too many thoughts. He tries to impart a story. And that is really different. And that's the way he wanted it. Part of what I found in the archives were a couple of book outlines that would have been fine books, but it was clear he didn't want to write them. He wanted to write something really different. So people often talk about Henri's enduring popularity and gift as his vulnerability, his ability to write so vulnerably, his desire to tell everyone how beloved they are, and all that's true. But I think there's something deeper than that. There's something in his kind of unflinching willingness to grapple deeper and deeper and deeper. And somewhere this book, he was trying to do that in a way that kept it experiential, so a reader could figure it out for themselves. And imagining himself into other stories is one of the things Henri did so well. I mean, if you think about him going to Selma, which is in this book, and picking up a Black young hitchhiker and suddenly finding that he's in a world he hadn't imagined, where they can't stop at gas stations, they can't stop for food. He wasn't expecting that. He imagines himself over and over again into different worlds, the worlds of people with disabilities. When he used to come over to our house, he'd come over and lie down on the floor with our very small children and slither around on the floor. I remember him looking under the sofa because he wanted to see what they saw. Like, he really wanted to get into other people's experience in a very non-judgmental, very open, curious way. Henri was the most wonderful combination of competent and incompetent, which maybe is part of what childlike implies, that there were things he didn't do well, and there were things he did spectacularly well. And there was a kind of simplicity to his enjoyment. And I think that's part of what the trapeze, his time with the Flying Rodleighs, he could just live like that with them a lot. That's why their experience of him was as someone very free, kind of flamboyant, really happy. And at daybreak, he would love to dance, to play with children, it released a kind of playfulness in him. And one of the ways he describes the Flying Rodleighs so often is the fun they're having together. He's really interested in how people have fun together, and the kind of energy of that. What's also interesting in terms of childlike is that he describes his response to the trapeze over and over again as adolescent, as his 16 or 17-year-old self. So he's not really talking about feeling like a child. He does at one point, he talks about, his little secrets when he's making tunnels in the backyard. And that's childhood, but his experience of the trapeze touches something that's that moment between childhood and adulthood, when you become aware of your body, when you become aware of your sexuality, when you're right on the verge of becoming an adult, and it's disorienting and exciting. And that's what it takes him to. And he emphasizes that over and over. It's not about the individual body. It's about the body in motion with other bodies. It's about things the body can do with others that you could never do by yourself. You can't fly if there's no catcher. You can't catch if there's no flyer. You can't even fall, in a way, if there's no one to have helped set the foundations that you'll fall safely. Like, you need other people. So his discovery of his body, part of what's so interesting is that it's not alone. It's always in community, in discipline. And what he writes that I use, let's find at the beginning of the book, I really liked that what he saw. He says, the 10 minutes that followed somehow gave me a glimpse of a world that had eluded me so far, a world of discipline and freedom, diversity and harmony, risk and safety, individuality and community, and most of all, flying and catching. That he's lining up all these things that none of them are individual.
Right.
They're all things you could only do with other people. So he's interested in the Flying Rodleighs and their discipline, in their structured life together. So the freedom is really tied to a lot of good communication, of a lot of work, a lot of very hard work. I've got to say, it was really fun. It was just really fun. It was wonderful to connect with Henri again over all these years. And the other thing, of course, is I am now the age Henri was in this story.
Wow.
I'm right squarely in the age he was. So's Rodley Stevens, by the way, of the Flying Rodleighs. We're about the same age, that we are now the age that Henri was when he was having these experiences. And I kept thinking about that, of his courage, of renting a recreation vehicle and traveling with a circus. And his own, actually, maybe I'll read something I keep thinking about. He an interviewer asks him, how is this going to be impacting your life in the years to come? And Henri says, I'd like to be freer. Just take more risks, and trust that. And actually, that's happened in a very deep way, just doing this crazy thing for me to rent a camper and go traveling through Germany with the circus. That's a little crazy in the first place, certainly when you're over 60 years old. But on deeper level, I mean, it has given me a sense that my life is just beginning. And for me, at the same age, I find myself really fascinated that Henri allowed this trapeze experience to just seize his imagination and just go with it. And I find myself kind of paying attention to what seizes my imagination. What are those moments in my life? And I hope readers do that too, that it doesn't mean we're going to go to the circus. I find I don't like heights, it isn't the image that grabs me exactly, but the question of listening for what, being attentive to what do you respond to physically, what grabs your imagination, and then hold on to it and work on it. And be really brave to walk straight into it. That I've been thinking about a lot. I think it goes deeper than just his ability to write vulnerably and personally. I think it's his ability to keep digging deeper and pushing himself to ask a deeper question. And I think it's also about the boundaries he puts around that he doesn't just indiscriminately pour out everything, that he really, really works on what's helpful, what brings God into the world, what embodies, how do we become embodiments of God in the world? How do we incarnate God? And he just keeps working on that.
Yeah.
And he doesn't leave it at a superficial level. He keeps digging. So his message isn't simple. He was a peacemaker. He spoke passionately about peace. He cared deeply about social issues. He really had to step over a kind of fear in himself to go speak to the National Catholic AIDS HIV network conferences. That was a huge thing for him to do. He was always open to what the next call would be in his life, really open to God. And was very brave about exploring, okay, what would that look like? And then making decisions. Okay, this I could do. I can go with the circus. This I can't do. And I think that's part of what makes him so enduringly interesting, because he pushes us to push a little deeper.
Definitely.
And to do
Definitely.
that from a place of trust, of grounding, though, that for Henri, that was always from a place of, or at least always in his head, he tried to remember that that was from a place of knowing that we come from God, that we're going to return to God, that we are beloved, that in a way we can't make any mistakes that can't be held within that big love.
Mm.
And that's where the courage comes from. And he really stayed well rooted in that, and invites readers to stay rooted there, and then be able to live with quite a lot of courage and fun, community, discipline,
Amen.
excitement. He was really he didn't want anyone to live a boring life. He wanted everyone to really get out there, trust ourselves, trust each other, and live in a way that really matters in the world, with a lot of energy and a lot of joy and solidarity.